My daughter-in-law texted, "Dinner's canceled." But when I walked past their house later that night, I saw them eating without me. I stood there, frozen, casserole in hand, trying to figure out what had just happened. It wasn't the first time Jenna had canceled last minute, but this time something felt off. There was no apology, no reason, just a cold, short text. "I'm Margaret Ellis, 67, retired school librarian, widow, and mother of one. That night, everything I thought I knew about my family changed. I'd gotten dressed up, wore my favorite sweater, even made sure the casserole was just right. Ethan had made the honor roll, and Brian had asked me to come celebrate with them. At least, that's what I thought. But now, standing there in the chilly air, the light from their windows spilling onto the sidewalk, I felt this heavy weight in my chest. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, mixing with the scent of fallen leaves. Everything around me felt alive, yet I was standing there, alone. With each passing minute, the disappointment turned into something sharper, colder. Jenna's text echoed in my mind, "Dinner's off, Ethan's not feeling well." But the laughter I heard from inside told a different story. I couldn't look away from the window. There they were, Jenna, Brian, and Ethan, all laughing. Ethan's face was lit up with the joy I always loved seeing. There was no sign of illness, no sign that anything was wrong, and there it was, the empty chair that should have been mine. I wasn't angry, not exactly, but the sting went deep. Watching Jenna refill glasses, watching Brian lean in to listen to Ethan, I couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Why wasn't I there? No one noticed me standing outside. No one came to the door. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding my cold casserole, feeling more invisible than I ever had before. I don't know how long I stood there, but the cold finally made me turn to leave. I didn't say a word to anyone, not to Linda, not to anyone. I didn't want to admit how much it hurt. I kept walking, back to the quiet of my house, but my mind was still stuck there, in front of their window. What had I done wrong? When I stepped into my empty home, the silence felt heavier than ever, but it would be the last time I let it crush me. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding, but then I went to Linda's flower shop. I wasn't the type to let things unsettle me, but something about the whole situation just didn't sit right. I couldn't stop thinking about that dinner, everyone laughing inside while I stood outside in the cold. When I walked into the shop, the familiar smell of fresh lilies and pine hit me, and the warmth of the place almost made me forget about the chill from the night before. Linda looked up from behind the counter and smiled when she saw me. "Didn't they love the bouquet?" she asked, wiping her hands on a rag. I was a little caught off guard. "What bouquet?" Linda's smile wavered slightly and confusion crossed her face. She pointed to the counter where a small vase of peonies sat. "The ones I delivered yesterday, the thank you flowers from you for the dinner." A sharp wave of something I couldn't quite name hit me, and suddenly I felt cold again, even though I was surrounded by warmth. "You're sure they were delivered yesterday?" My voice was shakier than I wanted it to be. Linda paused, looking at me with a kind expression. "Yes, of course. Jenna signed for them herself. I handed them to her at the door." I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, trying to take in what she was saying. The dried bouquet in my hands felt heavier, like an anchor. Jenna had received the flowers, and still lied about canceling the dinner. The truth hit me hard, harder than I thought it would. The kindness I had offered had been accepted, but ignored. A tight knot formed in my chest as I gently set the bouquet down on the counter. Linda was still watching me, now looking concerned. "You're sure she signed for them?" I asked again, the words slipping out before I could stop myself. "Yes," she said, nodding slowly. She was very polite, as usual. "Why?" I couldn't catch my breath. For a moment, I wasn't sure I could even stand. Every part of me wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but I just stood there holding the flowers as if they could explain everything. My heart felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of my own denial. Later that evening, I took the photo of us from the fridge, the one from Christmas 2 years ago, the one where we were all gathered smiling in front of the tree. I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure if I was letting go of a memory or finally making space for a truth I'd been ignoring for far too long. I turned the photo face down, feeling the warmth of the frame where it had been resting against the fridge. It was just a photo, just a moment frozen in time, but it felt like so much more than that. Something had changed in me. I'd been quiet for too long, making excuses for everything, but now I wasn't sure I could keep pretending anymore. I didn't bring up the dinner again, not to Brian, not to Jenna. But when the library gala came around, I made sure they got an invitation. It wasn't much, just a simple card with my name on it, inviting them to the event meant to celebrate me and my years of service. I'd already decided I wouldn't sit at their table if they didn't want me there, but I thought it was still the right thing to do. The right thing for me, so I sent it off, not really expecting anything. I just knew it was going to be awkward like everything else had been lately. It was my night, my retirement gala. I'd spent weeks getting ready, working on my speech, picking the right dress, even practicing my smile in the mirror. I kept telling myself everything would be fine, that it would all be okay. The night was supposed to be about me, about my years of service, about closing a chapter. But when I walked into the Ashland Public Library's event hall that evening, there was something in the air, something off. It felt heavy, like there were expectations I hadn't asked for. And then I saw it, one seat left empty, mine, at their table. I didn't say anything when I saw the seating arrangements or the little place cards in front of the other seats, each with a name, perfectly arranged. But mine wasn't there. The seat I should have been in beside Brian and Jenna was empty. Instead, they'd seated me at a table with some of my retired colleagues, people I'd worked with for years but never felt really close to. I stood there for a moment, watching everyone get settled in. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, just a mistake, maybe a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. As the evening went on, I gave my speech, pouring my heart out. The applause was genuine, warm, but it didn't fill the space. There was this crack in the air, a tension no one could see but I could feel, like the weight of something unspoken. Later, while I was sitting at my table picking at my salad, Ethan appeared by my side. He gave me a hug, one of those hugs you can tell is full of love, not out of obligation like the others. "Grandma," he whispered, pulling back to look at me. "I'm proud of you." He slipped a small card into my purse and walked away quickly. I didn't read it right then. I didn't need to. I already felt the weight of it. Later that night, when I was alone in my car, I pulled the card out and unfolded it. The words were simple, but they hit me harder than anything else that night. "I'm proud of you, Grandma." Those words from Ethan were the only thing that felt real, the only thing that felt like home. I smiled all night. The music played, people laughed, and I joined in. But that card in my purse, that was the only thing that felt like home. It wasn't much, just a small card, but it made me realize something. This was it. This was the moment I finally understood. My place, my worth, had always been here. I had just never truly been seen. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their seat at the table. I just needed to remember that sometimes the smallest things, the quietest gestures, are the ones that make you feel like you belong. And that was enough for me. A week passed, no apology, no explanation. Then Ethan's birthday came, and I waited for an invite that never came. I stood in the baking aisle of the grocery store holding a box of vanilla cake mix. The bright yellow box felt heavier than I expected. I stared at it, wondering if I should even bother. I'd always baked Ethan's birthday cake, our tradition for as long as I could remember. His favorite was a rich golden vanilla cake with thick buttercream frosting and sprinkles. He loved it, and I loved making it for him. But this year, I wasn't sure if it mattered anymore. I couldn't help but think about the last time we baked together in my kitchen. That felt so distant now, like another life. I glanced at the clock. It was already late morning, and I hadn't heard from Brian or Jenna. No one had acknowledged the birthday, not like they used to. I tried telling myself it was fine, that they were just busy, but deep down, I knew something was off. I sighed and put the cake mix in my cart, along with eggs, butter, and powdered sugar for the frosting. I kept hoping maybe I was wrong. Maybe they were running late. Maybe I'd get a call or a text or maybe an invitation to the party that afternoon. But nothing came. No phone call, no text. I didn't want to believe it, but the silence in the house felt like an answer I wasn't ready to hear. At home, I set up the kitchen, the familiar process of baking grounding me in something I could control. I mixed the batter, poured it into the pans, and slid it into the oven. The scent of vanilla and butter filled the air as I waited. I kept waiting, even though I knew deep down the invitation wouldn't come. But I couldn't help myself. I had to make sure they knew I cared. When the cake was cool enough, I frosted it with care. It looked just like it always had, the perfect shade of yellow with soft frosting piled high. I wrapped it carefully in cellophane and wrote a small card to go with it. Happy birthday, Ethan. I made your favorite. Love, Grandma. With the cake in my hands, I drove to their house, hoping somehow my small act of love would bridge the gap between us. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang again, waited, and then finally set the cake on their doorstep, unsure if anyone was home. I looked up, hoping for some sign, but the front door stayed closed and the windows were still. It felt like a strange kind of rejection. I stood there for a moment, my breath fogging in the cool air, then turned and walked back to my car. That evening, as I sat quietly in my living room, the weight of the day settled on me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Facebook, and there it was, a post from Jenna, a photo of Ethan in front of a birthday cake. The party had been big: decorations, balloons, catered food, and a bakery cake that didn't look anything like the one I made for him every year. Then, just as I was about to put my phone down, a voice note from Ethan popped up. I hesitated, then pressed play. "Thanks for the cake, Grandma," his voice said softly with a hint of sadness. "I saved a slice just for you." His words broke me. It wasn't his fault, but someone had decided I no longer existed in their world, and the weight of that truth hit me like a brick. I wiped away a tear before it could reach the frosting on my own cake, the one I hadn't even touched. If I was being slowly erased, I was finally noticing. As I stood there, holding the cake in my hands and wondering if it even mattered anymore, I couldn't help but think, have you ever felt like you were slowly fading away from the people you loved the most? Like, no matter what you did, you just weren't really seen anymore? If you've ever been through something like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you've been following along, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss where this story goes next. Trust me, things are about to change, for better or worse. I can feel it. So what do you think? Have you ever had to make the hardest decision to just let go? Let me know in the comments. By Thanksgiving, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. If they wouldn't sit me at their table, they were going to hear me, whether they liked it or not. I drove to Brian and Jenna's house, hands steady on the wheel but my heart racing. That familiar feeling of being invisible, of being pushed aside in my own family had festered long enough. It was time to reclaim my space, my way. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table anymore. If they couldn't see me, at least they'd hear me. "I brought more than pie," I said, handing Jenna 3 sealed envelopes as I walked in. She looked at the pie, then at the envelopes, her smile faltering just a bit. "What's this?" she asked, trying to cover her unease with a smile. I didn't wait for a response. "One's for you, one's for Brian, and one's for Ethan." I paused, setting the pie down on the counter, locking eyes with her. "I've updated my will, my power of attorney, and my house deed." She blinked, her expression unreadable, though I could tell she was trying to play it cool. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. "You updated your will?" she asked, trying to mask the discomfort in her voice. I nodded, glancing at Brian, who was standing by the door, looking a bit surprised. "Yes, I wanted to make sure everything was clear. Since I'm not always included, I can't just assume I'll be taken care of." Jenna let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're being dramatic, Mom. It's just Thanksgiving. I cut her off, my tone calm but firm. "I'm not being dramatic. It's just time you understood that I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not going to assume how things will go." I set the envelope in front of her, then looked at Brian, who was trying to step in. "Margaret, No," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is necessary." I turned away from them and walked toward the dining room. I wasn't going to sit at their table, not this time. I placed the pie on the far side of the room at a table with my cousins and sat down there. The room was awkwardly silent, and the clinking of forks on plates cut through the tension. As I sat there, I noticed Ethan scanning the room until he saw me. He smiled and came over, offering me a hug. I held him a little tighter than usual, keeping him close for just a moment longer. "Grandma," he said softly, slipping something into my hand as he pulled away. "I'm proud of you." I opened the small folded piece of paper, and my heart squeezed in my chest. "I'm proud of you, Grandma." It was a small note, simple, but it meant everything. Dinner went on, but I felt a shift, subtle but real. The energy in the room had changed, not because I was demanding it, but because I was finally standing up for myself, asserting my right to be seen. I didn't need to shout. The paper in my hand, the envelope in front of Jenna and Brian, spoke louder than words ever could. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was just being. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place, a real place, not just at the table, but in my own life. I didn't need to raise my voice. Paper can speak louder than words. After Thanksgiving, I started spending more time outside the house. The quiet of my own four walls had become suffocating, and the thought of being stuck inside any longer made me restless. So when the library board invited me for coffee, I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't just a regular meeting. It felt like an invitation to something bigger, something outside the family dynamics that had been draining me. "We'd love to name the new reading wing after you," Daniel said, his voice warm and steady. "If you're open to it." I froze for a moment, the words hanging in the air like steam rising from the coffee cup in front of me. For so long, I'd been defined by my role in my family, by who needed me and who didn't see me. But here, in this small cafe, surrounded by the smell of fresh coffee and old books, I was being asked to be something more, to be a part of something bigger than myself. My heart did a quiet flip, a mix of surprise and gratitude I hadn't felt in ages. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. The children's wing of the library, my library, the one I'd spent decades shaping and guiding, and now they wanted to honor me? Daniel, who had been a steady presence in my life since my early days at the library, smiled gently. "We've all talked about it. You've dedicated so much to the kids, to the community. It just feels right, and we want to make sure it's special." I let his words sink in, allowing myself to absorb the warmth in his voice. I looked around the cozy cafe, at the bookshelves filled with all the stories I'd helped nurture over the years. The idea of a reading wing being named after me, a legacy of my own making, felt surreal. Daniel went on, "We'd also love for you to help organize a small dedication ceremony if you're up for it. I smiled, though my mind raced. I'd be honored, I said, surprised by how genuine the words felt. But then a thought popped up, one I couldn't ignore. There's just one thing, I added, my voice firm. I'd like Ethan to cut the ribbon. Daniel raised his eyebrows slightly but nodded. Of course, we'll make sure he's a part of it. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of belonging, not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as a person in my own right, not just someone to take care of others, but someone who had created something that would live on long after I was gone. As we finished our coffee and talked about the details of the event, I realized how different this felt from anything I'd experienced in recent months. For once, I was being valued, not for what I could give, but for who I was, and I couldn't remember the last time that had felt so good. I walked home with my coat unbuttoned, the brisk winter air feeling kind against my skin. There was something freeing in the chill, a reminder that life wasn't always about staying warm and comfortable. Sometimes it was about stepping out into the cold and embracing what was new, what was different, and most importantly, what was mine. It was a small step, but it was mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe freely again. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was set for the second week of January, and I made sure Ethan was the first to know. I wanted him there, to be the one to hold the scissors. This moment meant so much, not just for him, but for me, for us. As the day got closer, I felt a mix of nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was ready, but I also knew something was going to change today. Something about the way I saw myself and how my family saw me. Ethan stood in front of the crowd, his hands trembling as he held the scissors. "This is for Grandma," he said, his voice steady but small, his cheeks flushed with the weight of the moment. She taught me how to read. The crowd softened, smiles spreading across faces as they watched him. "My grandson," his gentle words filling the air, a quiet declaration of love and respect. For a second, it felt like time stopped, and I felt something stir inside me that I'd almost forgotten. The warmth of belonging, the realization that I mattered, not just as a grandmother, but as someone who had created this moment. I'd taught him to read long before school ever did. I remembered the days when it was just the two of us, sitting on the old couch, me holding up picture books, teaching him to sound out words and turning pages with excitement. Those simple moments had shaped who he was becoming. And now, here he was, standing in front of a room full of people, his voice carrying something much deeper than I expected. Daniel, one of my colleagues, stepped up to introduce the event. He thanked me for decades of service, for all the children I'd shaped and guided, and for the love I'd poured into the library, its books, and its future. But it wasn't until Ethan, unprompted, gave a short speech that I felt a true shift inside me. There, in the soft glow of the library's new children's wing, Ethan spoke with a sincerity I hadn't anticipated. Then, in one swift motion, he cut the ribbon and the bright blue fabric fell away to reveal my name on a bronze plaque. The crowd clapped, but the sound didn't quite reach me. I was somewhere else, lost in the quiet joy of seeing Ethan so proud. Later, after the ceremony, as the applause died down and the crowd began to leave, I caught sight of Jenna whispering something sharply to Brian. She was tense, her posture stiff. When Brian nodded, it wasn't like he usually did, just following her lead. This time he hesitated. For a moment, I wondered what had changed. Had he seen me differently today? Had Ethan's gesture shifted something in him too? But I didn't dwell on it. I didn't need to. I didn't need applause. I just needed to see Ethan smile like that again. And I did. As I stood there watching my family, I realized something. I had created a legacy, not with money, not with expectations, but with the love I had quietly given all these years. And that was enough. Ethan's smile was all the reward I would ever need. Standing there, watching Ethan cut that ribbon, I finally felt seen, like all those years of silence had somehow led to this moment. Have you ever had one of those moments when everything just falls into place, even when you thought it was too late? It's funny how life can surprise you like that, isn't it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on finding your place when it feels like the world has moved on without you. Drop a comment below. Do you think we ever stop looking for our seat at the table, or do we just decide to make our own space? I can't wait to share what happens next, but for now, tell me, what does your moment of being seen look like? The next weekend, I didn't get my usual Saturday call from Brian, or Sunday, or Monday. Just silence again. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but it still hurt. I could feel it creeping in, like a cold front slowly freezing the space between us. It had been happening more often lately, the phone calls that used to come like clockwork, now disappearing into nothing. I told myself I wasn't waiting anymore, that I was fine, that it didn't affect me, but I was lying. By Tuesday, the silence was too much, so I left a message. A simple one, no expectations. Hey, it's me, just checking in. I hope everything's okay. The phone sat there for hours, silent. When I finally got through to Brian, his voice was thin, like he was holding back more than just words. Mom, Jenna thinks it's better if we all take a little space. Those words hit me like a slap. Space. Again. This had become their way of dealing with things. Distance. Always distance after a moment of closeness. But this time, it felt different. This time, it was clear. The space wasn't for me to breathe. It was for them to breathe from me. I stayed quiet for a long moment, letting the silence hang between us. When I finally spoke, my voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. It was never about her, I said, my words steady but heavy with everything unspoken between us. Brian didn't respond right away. I could feel him on the other end, unsure. And then, after what felt like forever, he just said, "I'll talk to you later, okay?" The line went dead, and I was left there, holding the phone, with nothing but the quiet air of my house pressing down on me. I needed to get out, clear my head, so I pulled on my coat and went to Lithia Park. The cold January air hit me as soon as I stepped outside, but it felt good in a way, a brisk reminder that I was still here, still walking, still moving forward. I walked through the park, the sound of my boots crunching over the frozen ground the only noise. The trees were bare, their branches etched against the overcast sky. Everything felt still, yet alive in a way that matched my thoughts, calm but full of quiet energy. In the stillness of the park, something inside me finally settled. I had been waiting for a change that wasn't coming. I had been chasing a relationship that wasn't mine to chase anymore. And now I was ready to stop. When I got home, I picked up my phone and scrolled to Brian's contact. Without thinking, I deleted his photo. It wasn't about cutting him off, it was just removing the weight of waiting. Maybe silence wasn't punishment, maybe it was peace. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain, justify, or reach out. I had taught them how to love, but what they did with it was up to them. I didn't need to wait anymore. The peace was enough. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, I found something wedged between the pages of a returned library book. It was quiet in the children's section, just the soft hum of the heating system in the background. The afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the bookshelves. I was doing my usual rounds, reshelving donated books, when one caught my attention. It was a bit torn at the edges, so I thought I'd quickly fix it before putting it back on the shelf. As I opened the book to smooth out the pages, something slipped out. At first, I thought it was just a stray bookmark, but when I unfolded it, I saw the familiar handwriting. "Dear Grandma," the note started, "I miss you. I left this here in case Jenna checks my phone." I froze for a second, my heart skipping a beat. Ethan's handwriting, my grandson. His words were simple, but they hit me like a wave. I ran my fingers over the paper, remembering how he used to slip me little notes when he was younger, secret messages just for me, hidden in the margins of his books or tucked under my pillow. In the years since, I'd missed those small moments, those little gestures of love. But now, here it was, a message from him. He missed me, and more than that, he hated what was happening between our families. He hated the silence. "I still have your ribbon in my drawer," he added at the bottom. The ribbon. The one from the library event. The one he had cut with such pride when the new children's wing was dedicated in my honor. That ribbon, small but meaningful, represented everything I had hoped for: my family, my place in the world, and the love I thought would never fade. And now it sat in Ethan's drawer, a quiet token of his love, waiting for me. I pressed the note to my chest, my breath catching in my throat. Tears welled up, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something else: relief, gratitude, even joy. Ethan's love was still there. It had never left me, even if the rest of the world felt distant. For so long, I'd been carrying the weight of their silence, letting it slowly erode me, making me feel like I had lost everything. But now, standing in that quiet library, the note in my hands, I realized something. I hadn't lost everything. I hadn't lost him. Ethan had found a way to reach me, to remind me that love hadn't disappeared. I took a deep breath and wiped away the tear that had escaped. I didn't know if I'd ever sit at their table again. I didn't know if things could ever go back to how they were, but I had this note. I had Ethan's love, and most importantly, I had myself. As I folded the note back up and slipped it into my pocket, I felt a sense of peace settle inside me. The warmth of Ethan's love was enough for now, enough to carry me forward, even if it meant walking this road alone for a while longer. Maybe things weren't perfect, and maybe I still had questions, but I wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. Spring arrived in Ashland, and I heard there was a dinner at Bryan's for Ethan's school achievement. But I hadn't been invited. It wasn't a surprise, not really. I'd learned to expect this kind of thing. The subtle omissions, the empty spaces where I should have been, but when I got a text from Linda, it hit me in a way I didn't expect. "Didn't know you'd skipped Ethan's award dinner," she wrote. I hadn't skipped it. I hadn't been invited, and in that moment I finally understood something I had been avoiding. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. They had made a choice, and I wasn't part of it anymore. For a long time I'd convinced myself it wasn't personal, that I was just forgotten, that life had moved on, and maybe things would change. But now I knew I had been excluded, on purpose. I didn't confront Bryan or Jenna. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I quietly got dressed, the way I'd done for their dinners and celebrations before, but this time I did it for myself. I wasn't going to sit at their table, but I wasn't going to stay home either. I drove to a small diner on the edge of town, a place I'd passed 100 times but never really noticed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tomato sauce and garlic, and soft jazz played over the speakers. I slid into a booth by the window, watching the sunset and paint the sky a soft pink. When the waitress came over, she smiled politely, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Are you waiting for anyone?" she asked. I met her gaze and smiled softly. "Just someone I used to be." I ordered Ethan's favorite, spaghetti with meatballs and orange soda. It felt like a small act of rebellion, ordering something so simple, something that brought back memories of better days. The food came quickly, the spaghetti steaming, the sauce rich and savory. I took a bite and felt the warmth of it, the comfort it brought. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I raised my glass of orange soda in a silent toast. I toasted to myself, to the woman I had become, and to the version of Ethan I used to know, before the silence, before the distance crept in between us. I sat there for a while, the jazz music wrapping around me, the soft clink of silverware from other tables filling the space. I wasn't sad, not anymore, but I wasn't happy either. It was a quiet, bittersweet feeling, like the gentle bloom of spring. After a while, I grabbed a napkin from the table and scribbled a short note on it. The words came easily. For every seat I wasn't offered, I made space for myself. I folded the napkin and tucked it into my purse, knowing it would stay with me for a long time. It wasn't a victory, exactly, but it was a moment of peace, a reminder that I was still here, still standing, still making space for myself in a world that tried to erase me. I didn't cry that night. I just went home, full of food and peace, the kind of peace that didn't come from being included, but from knowing that I didn't need their table to feel whole. It had been nearly 3 months since I'd heard from Ethan. Then, one Sunday, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was a quiet evening, the kind of night where the world feels still just before dusk, when the light turns golden. I had just settled into my armchair with a book in my lap when the doorbell rang, cutting through the silence. I stood up slowly, my heart beating a little faster than usual, and walked to the door. When I opened it, there he was, Ethan, standing on the porch with a backpack slung over one shoulder. In his hands, he was holding the same ribbon from the library opening, the one he had cut during the dedication ceremony. It felt like a lifetime ago, but here it was again, a small symbol of everything that had passed between us. "Can I stay here, just for the night?" he asked, his voice quieter than I remembered, like the weight of the question was too much to bear. My heart swelled, a mix of surprise and something deeper. I stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Of course, Ethan. Come in." He hesitated for just a moment, then stepped inside, the familiar weight of his presence filling the space. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't need to. He was here, and that was enough. I made tea just like I used to when he was younger, and watched as he sank into the couch. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with the unspoken things we both knew. He didn't say much, but his eyes told the story. He was lost, caught in something I couldn't fix, but still, I would try. "I don't feel seen at home anymore," he said quietly, his words hanging in the air like something fragile. I nodded, setting the tea down in front of him, and sat beside him, just close enough to let him know I was there. "I know," I said softly. "I can see you." He didn't say anything else, but I could see the relief in his shoulders, the tension starting to ease. I offered him the guest room, the one I'd made up with his favorite quilt. It wasn't much, but it was his. It had always been his. Before bed, I sat beside him, as I had so many times before, and read aloud the same bedtime story we used to share. It was a little ritual, one I hadn't realized I missed until now. His eyelids drooped as I read, his breath slowing. For the first time in a long while, I felt something warm and real between us. As he drifted off to sleep, I whispered softly, "You're always welcome, even if no one else says it." He didn't respond, but I saw his hand move slightly, like he was trying to hold on to the words. I kissed his forehead gently, then left the room, my heart a little lighter than it had been in so long. For the first time in years, I left the hallway light on, for someone who might need to find his way back. I didn't need to say anything else. There was no need for big gestures or promises. The quiet, unconditional presence I offered him was enough. He knew it. I knew it. And for the first time in months, it felt like we were both finally home again. My birthday came that May. No calls, no cards, just a knock at the door and one handmade envelope. I didn't expect much. The silence had become a quiet companion, one I'd learned to live with. So when the knock came, I wasn't really surprised. What was a little surprising, though, was the small folded envelope lying on the doorstep, with no return address, just a scribbled "for Grandma." I bent down to pick it up, my heart skipping a beat when I recognized the handwriting. It was messy, familiar, Ethan's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, carefully folded. As I opened it, my chest tightened. The words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. "Happy birthday, Grandma. You're still the best part of my story." I smiled as I read it again. This was it. After all the silence, all the waiting, this small note was more than I could have hoped for. It wasn't just a birthday wish. It was a reminder that I hadn't been forgotten completely, that there was still love between us, even if it wasn't the same as before. I sat there for a long time, the note in my hands, feeling both full and empty at once. Then quietly, I stood up and went to the kitchen. I wasn't going to let the day go unnoticed. I had learned not to let others define how I felt, and today I was going to spend it exactly how I wanted. I made tea for myself and for Linda, who had called earlier to wish me well. She'd been my steady support through everything, always there, always listening. Today, I wasn't waiting for anyone else's call or card. Linda and I had a quiet tradition of sharing my birthday over tea in the library garden, and today would be no different. When Linda arrived, she handed me a small, neatly wrapped gift. Inside was a tiny journal with a soft, inviting cover. She smiled as I opened it. "I thought you could write your own story," she said, her eyes kind and understanding. I looked at her for a moment, then down at the journal in my hands. I hadn't written in so long. I wasn't sure I even had the words anymore, but I opened it to the first page, my pen ready. I thought about the years gone by, the silence, the erasure, and what had come of it. Then slowly I wrote one sentence. I let go, and then I lived. The words came easily. Maybe they had been waiting for me to speak them. I set the pen down and closed the journal, the weight of what I had written settling in my chest. Linda sat beside me, the quiet hum of the world around us making the moment feel sacred. We drank our tea surrounded by blooming lilacs that filled the air with the scent of new beginnings. The sun set slowly, casting a golden glow over the garden. Finally, I raised my teacup, smiling softly at Linda. "To the seat I built when theirs was no longer mine," I said quietly, my voice steady. Linda raised her cup too, her eyes meeting mine with quiet understanding. We clinked our cups together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food or expectation. I wasn't erased. I rewrote the ending, and somehow, in this quiet garden, I found my place, a place of my own. As the seasons shifted, so did my understanding of love and family. The quiet space I had created for myself was no longer filled with regret, but with peace. Life has a way of showing us that sometimes the most important thing isn't waiting for others to invite us to the table. It's learning to build our own. When we give others the room to make their choices, we also find the strength to make our own. In the end, it's not about who stands beside us, but about standing firm in who we are. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences with me. What have you learned about love, loss, and finding your way? And if you're curious about what happens next, don't miss the next video. My daughter left me at the airport, so I left him at the bank with no roof, no rescue, no reply. You won't want to miss it.